No, for centuries even, it depends on the interpretation. That the casual interpretation of the Tower of Babel is that this is the attempt by superstitious people to hypothesize about the origin of multiple languages. That's not what it means at all. It means that the consequence of centralized, unidimensional, prideful, mad power-seeking is a fractionization and atomization of a society that's so complete that no one person can understand anyone else. That's a vision of hell. The collapse of the Tower of Babel. And it's a vision of inevitability, because the idea is that any system of unified totalitarian power will inevitably degenerate into mutual incomprehensibility and collapse. And you can ask yourself, well, do you believe that that's the case? It's like, well, how else do you approach the history of the 20th century? What happened repeatedly to the various Towers of Babel that we built politically? What happened to the Soviet Union? What happened to Nazi Germany? What happened to Maoist China? What happened to Cambodia? What happened every single time people in their intellectual pride attempted to build a structure that was oriented toward some destination other than what should properly be placed in the highest place? The answer is people degenerated into mutual incomprehensibility, chaos emerged, and we built hell. Not the hell we could still yet build, and that's for sure. So what does that mean with regards to you Americans? Your society is remarkably robust and resilient, and it's remarkably free. I don't think it's any exaggeration to claim that you have the freest and most resilient society in the world. So what's great about your country? Well, your country is predicated on the notion that you are each created in the image of God and that you have a domain of intrinsic worth that manifests itself in two ways. One, it manifests itself as your rights in relationship to the state. Not that the state grants them, but that the state is to find its limit at the border of the rights that are intrinsically yours as a consequence of your essentially valuable nature. And associated with that is a commensurate responsibility. With every right, there's a responsibility. And so the responsibility that each of you bear as sovereign citizens is the responsibility to maintain order within your lives. Maintain and produce the order that's good within the confines of your life. To take care of yourself and to find the adventure of your life in that ability to be the captain of your own ship, the master of your own destiny. To do that well enough so that you can dare marry. To do that well enough so that you can take care of a family, so that you can be of service to your community, so that you can serve your state and your country under God. That distributed responsibility, that's the alternative to the Tower of Babel. That's laid out very clearly, by the way, in the book of Exodus, where the concept of subsidiarity emerges. And the concept of subsidiarity is a vision of a hierarchy of distributed responsibility that's the antidote to slavery and tyranny. You can see that reflected in your political structure because there's no, it resists centralization. You have a division of power, but more than that, you have a state of states. And the states themselves, like the towns and the cities, have their domains of power and responsibility. And so the authority that could be centralized in a single entity is distributed across the entire pyramid, all the way down to the individual. And that makes your society remarkably robust. One of the things that I've observed as a Canadian watching you Americans for like 50 years, I can remember in the 1980s, there was a widespread fear that Japan was going to emerge as the reigning financial master of the world. And that threat seemed to be credible for about 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And Japan centralized, and you Americans didn't. And there were plenty of places in your country that weren't doing the right thing, but there were plenty of places that were doing the right thing. And out of those places that continued to do the right thing, new abundance flourished. And you do that all the time. You did that again in the 1990s. And it's a consequence of the manner in which your state is structured, right from the individual upward. It's a consequence also of your willingness as individual citizens. And I also see this as characteristics of the United States. One of the things that characterizes your society that's very unique, and maybe unique even among Western countries, is that you wholeheartedly admire productive, generous competence. That's at the core of the American dream, right? If people in this country, people who make it in consequence of their own honest and upward striving efforts, are genuinely admired. And that's your wealth, really. And that's also your recognition that technological prowess and even material abundance can be positive goods if they're put in the right place. That's like anger, and that's like sexuality, and that's like fear. All of these things can be beneficial in the right place. That ambitious striving that makes your land rich and rife with opportunity and possibility and beauty and cultural richness is a consequence of the positioning of that material ability and security and opportunity in the proper place in the hierarchy of values that strives properly upward. The founders of your republic knew this because they understood that your rights were self-evident as a consequence of the embeddedness of your culture in the underlying Judeo-Christian tradition that positioned what was properly sovereign above everything that was political and beyond, above and beyond everything that was merely political, and that simultaneously called upon each citizen and the leaders of the citizens to pursue their individual pursuits and their political endeavors in light of their commitment to what was properly put in the highest place. And that is precisely what's made your country rich. I don't know if you know of an economic phenomenon called the resource curse. People, especially of the leftist persuasion, believe that countries are wealthy because of natural resources. But there is no relationship between the natural resources of a given country and its wealth. In fact, the statistical relationship is slightly negative. Why? Because unearned wealth is an invitation to corruption and instability. And that's what happens in resource-rich countries. Your country is rich because your people are, by and large, ethical. Your country is rich because, by and large, the default transaction between individuals in the United States is honest. There is no other natural resource than the truth that makes honest trade between strangers possible. With that in place, every desert can bloom. That's why LA exists. Well, I mean it. It was a desert. The entire western part of your country was uninhabitable. It's the cooperative, productive generosity of your citizenry that made that harsh environment not only habitable, but wealthy. That's a consequence of the orientation of your society, not towards these towers, this Tower of Babel gigantism, but towards its distributed responsibility and rights, and its orientation towards the proper uppermost goal. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. The fundamental characterization of God in the opening chapters of Genesis is that God is the spirit that orients itself upward and transforms chaotic possibility into the order that's habitable and good. That's the garden in which man is placed. Man is and woman, because it's insisted upon in the text that this characterization applies to both sexes. Men and women are made in the image of God, and so they are reflections of the proclivity to bring order to chaos. We bring order to chaos through the practice of proper sacrifice. What does that mean? To put things in their proper place, to aim up and to let go of everything that interferes with that aim, to make the proper sacrifices. That establishes the appropriate order. We deviate from that sacrifice at our peril, the pathway of insufficient sacrifice leads to murder and chaos and totalitarianism and genocide.